Workshop zum Solidarischen Antiimperialismus. Ich bin Jonas, das ist Philipp. Ich fange erstmal an mit ein paar technischen Dingen. Dieser Workshop wird auf Deutsch stattfinden, aber später werden unsere Gäste auf Englisch antworten. Falls ihr Übersetzungsgeräte braucht, findet ihr die hinten. Sie haben Übersetzer. Könnt ihr euch jetzt schon mal welche nehmen. Dann wird dieser Workshop aufgezeichnet, beziehungsweise live gestreamt auf YouTube. Ich hoffe, das ist okay für euch. Es geht auch währenddessen eine Kontaktliste rum. Falls ihr interessiert seid an unserer Organisation, könnt ihr euch da gerne eintragen und mal vorbeikommen. Falls irgendwas sein sollte, haben wir da einen Notausgang und sonst die Tür raus, entweder rechts oder links die Treppen runter. Das sind die nächsten Notausgänge. Genau, ich fange an mit einer kleinen Einleitung, um ein bisschen Kontext zu geben. Okay. Die europäische Nachkriegsordnung seit 1945 und die unipolare Welt nach 1991 unter der Hegemonie des US-Imperialismus gehen zu Ende. Der russische Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine läutete eine neue Phase imperialistischer Expansion ein. Die Großmächte USA, China, Russland und Europa sind dabei, ihre Einflusssphären neu aufzuteilen. Nicht zuletzt sind dabei die Mächteverhältnisse im Mittleren Osten von großer Bedeutung. So bleibt die gesamte Region höchst instabil. Der sogenannte Waffenstillstand in Palästina bleibt brüchig und Israel scheut nicht vor wiederkehrenden Angriffen auf Nachbarstaaten zurück. Der Sturz des Assad-Regimes in Syrien zeigte gleichzeitig, dass der durch den Arabischen Frühling im Jahr 2011 in Gang gesetzte Kampfzyklus jederzeit wieder beginnen kann. Es öffnen sich immer wieder Fenster für emanzipatorische Veränderungen, die je nach Entwicklung der Kräfteverhältnisse allerdings auch reaktionäre Wendungen nehmen können. Für die imperialistischen Staaten ist die Macht des Stärkeren wieder zum Leitprinzip internationaler Politik geworden. Umso dringender ist es deshalb, im Rahmen eines Dialogs der Peripherien einen solidarischen Antiimperialismus zu entwickeln, der sich nicht auf die Seite eines imperialistischen Lagers schlägt, sondern internationale Solidarität von unten aufbaut.
Ja, hallo zusammen, auch von meiner Seite. Ich bin Philipp, herzlich willkommen zu unserem Workshop. Und, ich freue mich sehr, auch im Namen der Bewegung für den Sozialismus euch hier begrüßen zu dürfen. Ich möchte als erste Gäste vorstellen, und zwar haben wir einerseits Leila, sie ist eine britisch-syrische Autorin und Aktivistin. Wir haben Lena, sie ist Mitglied der sozialistischen Organisation aus der Ukraine, die ist auch in der Feministenbewegung aktiv. Und wir haben Alexander, ebenfalls Mitglied von Sozialen der sozialen Bewegung, die das übersetzt heißt, diese Organisation aus der Ukraine, und forscht zurzeit an der Universität Uppsala in Schweden zu Sicherheitspolitik und Sicherheitsfragen, vor allem im europäischen Kontext. Nicht nur im europäischen Kontext. Genau. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass ihr den Weg nach Zürich zu uns geschafft habt, und wir haben die Idee, diesen Workshop vor allem als Diskussion zu gestalten. Wir würden uns auch sehr freuen, wenn ihr bei euren Speeches aufeinander Bezug nehmt oder gerne aufeinander reagieren. Ebenso soll natürlich auch das Publikum einbezogen werden. Wir haben es aber auch geplant als einen solidarischen Austausch zwischen unter anderem west- und osteuropäischen Linken, aber auch wie mit Leila hier noch darüber hinaus. Was wir weniger Bock haben, ist auf ja, Belehrungen unserer osteuropäischen oder syrischen Genossinnen hier von westdeutschen Linken. Das ist nicht unbedingt das, was wir hier vorgesehen haben. Genau. Wir werden, wie gesagt, in Englisch sprechen und ja, freue mich sehr auf diesen Austausch. So, yes, my first question to you all will be, actually in German there's this expression, Solidarischer, Antiimperialismus, and we had this discussion before that it's a bit difficult to translate in English, but my first question is, what do you mean, you three, by anti-imperialism? What do you expect from an anti-imperialist movement, and solidarity, anti-imperialism? So that will be your first question. And you three go. You start also.
I can try, but
there's a red button that helps you.
Okay, thank you. Well, for me, this concept means, first of all, standing together against those in power who try to control their own benefit. And standing together not because of guilty consciousness, not because of piety, but because of shared common interests. Because everyone knows that today it's me and tomorrow it's you.
A little bit nervous, and I'm sorry for my English. Maybe it's still less through one moment, but yeah, for me, as for Ukrainian Marxists, what's an example of anti-imperialist act happened 4 years ago in Ukraine, when people decided to start fight against Russian imperialism, and in Ukraine, it's not so easy to use this left-wing anti-imperialist rhetoric for many reasons. But still, if people even not use such a rhetoric and opposite sides try to tell about liberation, denazification and so on, we should look to the core of what's going on and who's the aggressor and who's the oppressed.
Hello everyone. For me, solidarity-based anti-imperialism, first of all, means challenging all imperialisms. And I think we're in a situation where a lot of the left that uses anti-imperialist language only chooses selective anti-imperialisms due to this hangover from the Cold War, this campus perspective, which sees the world divided into two blocks, the US, the European Union and Israel on one side, and on the other side, Russia, China, Iran, other states which are considered anti-imperialist states, but in fact are also carrying out imperialist policies. So that would be the first thing, to look at all imperialisms. And the second thing would be to put our faith in people instead of states. Not to look towards states as our liberators, but really to support struggles on the ground and support struggles on the ground and put people before states.
Yeah, thank you. Back in 2018, I guess you wrote a famous text with the title "The Anti-Imperialism of Idiots." And in this text, you're making a sharp critique of the Western left, who exactly has a selective anti-imperialist thoughts on the world. And yeah, could you explain a bit more what you mean by what you said before, and deeper a bit your analysis? And yeah,
So the text was written in 2018, and the conflict in Syria, the revolution and the counter-revolutionary war in Syria had been going on for 7 years at that time. And the Western left had mobilized 3 times. And in all those 3 times, it was a response to Western states threatening to attack the military capabilities of the Syrian regime following chemical weapons attacks. So when I wrote the article in 2018, there'd been a huge chemical weapons atrocity in Khan Sheikhoun, and many civilians had been killed, including women and children who were sheltering from the gas in their basements. And the left mobilized and went out into the streets in huge numbers across Europe because Western powers were threatening to target the military capabilities of the Assad regime and the chemical weapons factories. But for the past 7 years, this war had killed at that point over 500,000 people. And most of those people had been killed, I think over 90% of those people at the time had been killed by the Assad regime, a fascist dictatorship, and its allies, Iran and Russia. But nobody had mobilized at all to protect civilians from the horrendous atrocities that they were facing by the Assad regime. So, of course, this outraged Syrians because obviously it had nothing to do with ending the war. It was more about protecting the Assad regime to stay in power because the Assad regime was seen as part of the axis of resistance and defending the region from US imperialism. I've already defined like the campus analysis, which puts states before people and sees our liberation as coming from states. And first of all, I think this is a deeply authoritarian analysis, because what it's ignoring is actually the social struggle on the ground. So it's seeing everything as this kind of geopolitical chess game between states, but it's actually ignoring the class struggle and the dynamics on the ground, that there was a people opposing their own regime, and for very good reasons. People wanted freedom, they wanted social justice, they wanted democracy. So yes, by putting this focus, the Western left putting this focus on the US, I mean, it's a very racist analysis for a start, and it's a very egocentric analysis, because what it's basically saying is the only people who have power to make history, who have power to affect the world, are white men. And we need to recognize that there's other actors in the world that have agency too, both to cause oppression and to cause suffering, but also to resist it. But people on the ground were completely invisible. There was no attempt to listen to the Syrian people, to understand their analysis, to see what they needed. And in fact, much of the left kind of adopted this war on terror discourse that came from the neocons, saying that all Syrian revolutionaries were jihadists, they're Islamists. We heard a similar narrative with Ukraine, where parts of the Western left said that all Ukrainian resistance were Nazis. But I think one of the main concerns for me at that time, in 2018, this was a time we were really seeing the rise of fascism becoming a real political power. You had the alt-right in the US and also the rise of fascism in Europe. And the discourse of these anti-imperialist leftists and the far right was virtually indistinguishable, because the far right has taken such a strong anti-imperialist stance, and the people that were on the streets protesting against Western attacks on Syria were the anti-imperialist left and the far right. Key figures in the far right, Richard Spencer in the US, was very, very vocal against American imperialism. And this was really a concern for me, because I really think this is a way of fascist entryism into left-wing movements, and I think we need to be very, very aware of that. And the place where it was most clear, this convergence, was around conspiracy theories. And you see a lot of conspiracy theories being spread on the far left and the far right. For example, on Syria, I've said the one already that all Syrian revolutionaries were jihadists, but we also had a lot of conspiracy theories that civil defence workers, the white helmets who would spend their time pulling the victims of atrocities from the rubble, were called, Al-Qaeda, and this was really the Russian narrative. This was the narrative that came from the Russian state and the far right. Why? Because the white helmets were the ones on the ground which were directly documenting Russian atrocities. Yeah.
Thanks. Alexander, as a Ukrainian left-wing activist, you know this selective anti-imperialism very well. So my question to you is, how do you deal with it, or how do you try to deal with it? And perhaps more general question, what challenges does the Ukrainian left faces at the moment after nearly 4 years of full-scale war?
I think the first part of it is particularly relevant in the light of the second, so I'll focus on that more. To understand the situation in Ukraine, you should try to imagine what is going on. It's been almost 4 years of the war in the country, with constant challenges, with constant hits on the infrastructure, destroyed cities, people fighting in the army, people fleeing the country, people fleeing their cities as well. And this is something that affects the left. This is something that affects trade unions and all other organizations in the country. Because your own activists, their priorities change. Someone is mobilized, someone maybe is injured or dead already. Somebody else had to flee their house and build their life from the scratch. And some others, well, they are struggling with basic reproduction things. When you have no electricity, when you know heating in winter because of the strikes, when the public transport doesn't work, all daily things, they take so much longer and so much more energy. Combined also with the empathy or kind of worries about those who are even in worse condition, those of your relatives, the close ones. It creates a huge mental toll on people, so it is not the best situation for organizing for political work. But looking at the situation in Ukraine, I had a bit more elaborated version of the question sent to me, which mentioned corruption, anti-corruption protest in particular. And this is a good, more inspiring example, because there were young people, somewhat they are in a better position sometimes, having less responsibility. And it was very inspiring to see that they care and how they use their free time to go on the streets and protest against what is happening in our country in the middle of the war, where the anti-corruption infrastructure is being dismantled. But also, if you're looking at the general frame and the context of these protests, basically the main leverage was to show and point out what is going on in Ukraine to the world, to our European allies that can, in their turn, pressure Ukraine, and almost immediately some funding was withdrawn. So this is also some sort of fragility, I would say, perhaps even a tragedy of the current state of political organizing, because under normal circumstances you don't need this. You should be able, on your own, to influence those in power, to keep them in check. But that's kind of activism that is sometimes only available right now in Ukraine. You were also asking me, writing about the updates with the peace process, as we can say, and how it affects our situation. Well, just to give a brief update, there are plenty of divergent points, even though they say it's 95% done. I don't really understand how it is different from talks in Istanbul 3-4 years ago almost, which people believe almost brought peace if they weren't sabotaged by the West. There are also plenty of disagreements, just like right now, and we don't have any feeling that conversation and negotiations now are bringing any peace. any such. Main problems concern security guarantees that our government is trying to procure, so that Ukraine is not left alone. So when some sort of agreement is signed, it will be a good opportunity for everyone to move on, to switch to something else. That's probably what happened to Palestine about after the ceasefire agreement was signed. It just disappeared pretty much from the agenda. It's just the activists who care that keep attracting attention to it. And that's what every Ukrainian, not only government, is afraid of. It seems that in this negotiation, they almost got kind of Article 5-like guarantees. But even in looking at the situation in Europe right now, one can just ask, what does it even mean? What does Article 5-like guarantees mean? When one of the main guarantors is trying to get some lands it wants from another member of the same alliance. Will there be any solidarity if these guarantees will be tested? Another thing is about an important concern the territorial thing. Some people say that it's time for Ukraine to compromise by peace to stop bloodshed. The problem with the territorial exchange that, well, not an exchange, it's just unilaterally withdrawing. First of all, it's really hard to comprehend many people who live in the 21st century. For what reason should someone give territory to somebody else because of some absurd claims? Another part is that there are people who live there still, even now, over 100,000 at least, who live on these territories. Even more who lived there before but flee because it is dangerous. So nobody is interested in their opinions. Nobody is asking. This is not a problem. But even bigger problem that does not resolve anything, because Russia claims in their own constitution is not just this part of Donetsk, little tiny part of Luhansk Oblast. They also claim Solidarischer and Kherson Oblasts. They're those adjacent to the sea, and they're not going to give them away, because those parts of this region that they control, they're adjacent to the sea, and they provide the connection on the mainland between the Russia proper and Crimea that they occupied many years ago. But nonetheless, they claim the whole territory of those regions. And this is something that will continue to be a territorial dispute. So if you just give one part of the territory, it doesn't solve anything, because they will keep asking for more. And also, given this, with this idea in mind, so it doesn't guarantee anything, withdrawing from this territory that have been fortified for many years, withdrawing to open field, it means just basically giving in some territories to Russia without a fight, and make your own position more fragile, because it's hard to fight where there is no infrastructure, where nothing is prepared, where it's open fields, and the territories that we have to withdraw are heights, urbanized areas. So what people feel is hard to explain, but also what these negotiations expose as that Ukraine is, the greatest tragedy of Ukraine is not self-sufficient, it's highly dependent on the support from the outside. And even worse, it exposes that even Europe, that stood behind Ukraine all this time, is neither self-sufficient. All our fate is in the hands of the United States and of the President Trump. Whatever they demand, mineral deals, some concessions, anything else, you have no way to fight back. Because what Ukraine needs most is not only money, although Ukraine runs huge deficits from year to year, making it harder for the economy of an infrastructure to be sustained. It also needs arms to be able to continue the defense. And these arms, they come from America. All air defense system, advanced air defense system, they are American. And the supplies that are produced in America and Europe, but still it's American technology that they control. The satellite reconnaissance comes from America. And many, many other small things that are harder to replace because there is no equivalence, because this dependency was built over the years. And now what is left is only talk about how the situation is bad and how it shouldn't be. but there is no way to influence. And it accumulates together with the problems in Ukraine, which you can perhaps summarize as well. Feeling of injustice, feeling of distrust, and feeling of alienation. We have huge problems also in terms of just sustaining defense efforts, because some people are already in the army and they have been fighting for almost 4 years, and there is no certain term. They will have to be in the army until they're dead or until the war ends. And they feel kind of betrayed, they feel trapped. And they don't obviously advise their relatives to do this, or even their own children whom they try to send away to the West, to safe areas. And seeing this, also people outside, people in the civilian society, they also feel that they don't trust the system. They don't feel it's just, also in light of these corruption scandals, that you see how politicians, they're stealing money when the existence of the country is on the stake. And some of this money they send to Moscow, because that's where their accomplice was based. Or also in light of how our country is basically being given to the United States with minerals deals, so people ask, what are they fighting for? And it creates one of the huge disappointment. And the worst thing is, there is no way out for this. You can hate your own government as much as you wish, and there are many reasons for, but there is no way out for people because they are being attacked even by a worse government that is willing to sacrifice anything, sacrifice lives of Ukrainians, of Russian-speaking Ukrainians. They pretend to defend it, of their own citizens, whom they mobilize and send in the slaughter by hundreds of thousands. And the biggest problem or challenge for us as the left is that the failure of the left outside. I'm usually talking about Western left, but it's because this is the geography we are in. I think it's not limited to the Western left. A lot of left just, they fail to engage, they fail to try to influence the situation. They just run and escape in these safe positions of looking for peace, because everyone wants peace. People in Ukraine want peace, people in Russia perhaps want peace, people everywhere else, because why in the earth you would endure this horror? And they exploit this feeling, but without any idea, without any understanding how this peace is going to be built. They're trying to rally people. And of course, there's rooted desire. In Ukraine right now, you can find it, according to the latest poll, that 70% of Ukrainians, they say, like, whatever it takes, let's just sign anything that Russia wants for it to be peace. But will it bring peace? We don't know. And I think it will be exploiting these people's feeling, just to promise them something that cannot be achieved. The other part of the left, which for me personally, that sounds probably more reassuring, more comforting when they talk about justice, because we all want justice to happen. But quite often they also hide that there is no plan. The situation is hard and there are no easy solutions. We don't know how to achieve justice. So instead of just talking about this, perhaps it's something we can discuss for now. Quite often I come and I meet different people, experienced organizers, trade unionists, academics, politicians. I look at them, perhaps they know something, but when they just talk about peace at all costs or justice at all costs, it doesn't give me anything as a Ukrainian. And that's what perhaps we can discuss here in this group, in this panel, or continue discussing afterwards. We need some sort of a credible plan to understand what is happening next.
Yeah, thank you for the speech. Next question will be for Olena. Yeah, you argue in some of your text you wrote that Russia is not an alternative to global capitalism, which is yeah, and even though it presents itself as an anti-Western and sometimes also uses anti-imperialist vocabulary, and how can we deal as a left with an imperial power uses anti-imperialist vocabulary, or claiming itself that they are like against the US domination of the world, and
not to what regime says, but to what they do. And right now it's even visible on the rhetoric level because Putin.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit?
Yeah. So I had told that it's quite easily to answer because we should pay attention to what regimes, not to what regime says, but what they do. And right now it's even can be seen on the level of rhetoric because right now Putin keeps silence about what Trump did with Maduro or what he wants to do with Greenland and with Iran. Before Putin had told in the previous years there was an anti-imperialistic rhetoric which Putin produced, but now he probably hopes for some good agreement for himself to end the war in Ukraine on his strong position. Yeah, but even before, much before the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, happened a lot of terrible things because of the Russian imperialism. We can recall what's happened with Georgia, in Syria. Actually, right now, a part of Moldova is occupied by Russia, and what's going on in Belarus, thanks to Russian support. Also, in the 90s and early 2000s, was done by Russians in Chechnya, or Ichkeria is a part of Russia and Caucasian, where people actually fought for freedom, but now it's horrible totalitarian regime right now in Chechnya, but which loyal to Russian interests. And unfortunately, leftists, well, West leftists, maybe a lot of other leftists all over the world was blind to this kind of imperialism because Russians successfully covered it with the Soviet legacy. Also, it's important to look into Russia, what's going on now. There's a huge inequality and it had nothing to do with the Soviet project, which was before. Russian capitalism is the same like everywhere in the world, even maybe a little bit worse because of the huge political violence, because also of neoliberal reforms which run even a little bit faster than in Ukraine, because in Ukraine we still have some trade unions, some kind of populists who sometimes will use some left-wing rhetoric. For example, in Ukraine we still preserve our labor code, Soviet labor code, which rises in interest of working class people. And of course our government not satisfied with it, but still we preserve it. And in Russia this labor code was changed to a more neoliberal version in the very beginning of the regime. Also it's important to ask the question, is there some trade unions in Russia? What's the migrant policy, especially the migrant policy towards labor migrants from central part of Asia, where the left-wing activists there, where the human rights activists there, what's come with the eco and queer activists there. I can tell about my personal experience. I had a lot of friends, comrades from Russia, from Belarus, and actually no of them right now in Russia, they were all killed, or in prison, or they became migrants. So there's absolutely no space in Russia for any kind of activism, and especially democratic left-wing activism.
Yeah, thank you. So at this point we would like to open discussion also to the public or to you to add all the stuff or but da wäre auch Zeit für Fragen oder Kommentare aus dem Publikum.
Wir können auch erstmal eine kleine Flüsterrunde machen. Da könnt ihr mit den Leuten, die um euch rumsitzen, euch 1-2 Minuten austauschen. Vielleicht bilden sich dann erst die Fragen. Und wir würden die Fragen sammeln und dann den Leuten stellen.
Wir können nicht Pfannkuchen aufmachen, das ist mega heiß. Das ist so schrecklich.
Ich hoffe, wir konnten euch gut austauschen. Konntet ihr euch gut austauschen? Sind Fragen entstanden? Konntet ihr euch gut austauschen? Sind Fragen aufgekommen, die ihr gerne stellen würdet? Wir würden sie erstmal sammeln.
This is a question to the Ukrainian speakers. As you know, there are a lot of efforts for rearmament in different European countries, and a lot of the time the reasoning behind them that is given is a threat from Russia to countries beyond Ukraine as well. And I was wondering what you would wish for Western leftists, how you would wish us to relate to these efforts, what your recommendation or your feeling is when it comes to this, especially as you mentioned the need for security for Ukraine and the unreliable nature of Trump, etc.
Any other questions?
My question comes as I don't know, like supplementary question, like again to the question of the other person talking to the Ukraine people. I have read that the Link, there is a party, Link party in Germany. It's called the Linke, and they try to help Ukraine not through the way of weapon buying, because there is the fear that through weapon market we come to the Cold War tactics. Like all the countries try to compete with each other, the NATO countries, about how many weapons has every country, and they try to to prove that they can defend themselves. So they try through bank systems, through freezing accounts that are in Europe and Switzerland and Deutschland and Germany. Are you informed about that? Is there a collaboration? Can we talk about this measurement and how we can support it? Because at the end of the day, it's about the money, so or the geopolitical. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, I would like to point to a contradiction that I see in the different presentations that we will listen to. Elena has spoken, in my view, consequently of not supporting any side in an imperialist conflict. And at the same time, she said we cannot base our power in the state, we should organize the resistance from the ground. But then in the other two presentations, I've heard a lot of concern about the state of Ukraine. Now also in the two questions posed, this is in fact what is behind the government in Europe, what should we do about this? So it's always a discussion about what do we say to the state, what do we want from the state, but not the other, what can we do, I say, as a class. In my view, it is a class question. What is the perspective if we want to live in a world free of war? My view is that this can only be a proletarian perspective, so we should discuss about proletarian issues, and this is consequent internationalism. I agree also with the word of solidarity, but yes, we should be consequently against any nationalism, against any support of any nation state.
Thank you. We should support anyone who is bullied, anyone who's invaded, anyone whose weakness is taken advantage of by the powerful. That means supporting sometimes the war efforts led by small and weak governments when they're attacked by large and powerful governments. To do otherwise in the name of only focusing on class issues is to reduce our commitment to justice to total hypocrisy. Does anyone think that we should not have supported the Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese in their war effort against U.S. empire? Does anyone think we should not have supported the Spanish Republican government against Franco's fascist-backed attempts to take it over? As far as the perspective of peace and the problems of rearmament, if Ukraine falls, the danger of war will grow. The Ukrainian resistance is fighting for world peace. It may sound like a contradiction to say that we can only get to peace through war, but sometimes that's true. That's reality. That's how the world works. We had, where I'm from, the US empire found it hard to invade for many years, and still to some degree fears anti-war resistance because of the Vietnamese heroism in fighting against US imperialism. That fighting that war kept the rest of the world safe. And I think that's true with the Ukrainian resistance today. I also think that the Ukrainian resistance is one of the very few branches in the world that has made authoritarianism not just get its way unilaterally. It's making a big difference in opposing the authoritarian tide in the world, because there are a few other concrete examples. So I'll stop there.
Ich würde, first I would, before we've seen you both there, but I would also like the possibility to answer first, and then we have another intervention from the public.
Right.
Just if you want, like you can also say, you know, more.
Question we came here to answer them. And I mean, just like part of the first question I think was skipped, but it's more about to understand like sending arms to Ukraine versus threats to other nations by Russia too. Again, I have not been saying here that there are no these threats, and I didn't come here to provide clear answers or strategies to this. That's something that has to be discussed realistically, and I don't want to diminish threats that exist, particularly to countries adjacent to Russia that Russia claims as part of the zone of influence. Although it seems, honestly, that the phrase Ukraine as a shield of Europe in modern times stopped being just a figure of speech. Because for many European countries, supporting Ukraine to fight Russia means that Russia's attention is not so much paid elsewhere else, and they buy them time. So that's one of the logic that exists and is quite openly discussed. But as I said, I don't know how it ends. It may end up in a bad way, but the most important thing is to make right conclusions about this, so this is not for nothing, and that you do not waste time and start preparing for what is to come. Because as I said, even if you are talking just about weapons, a lot of these weapons is not produced in Europe. Europe depends on its capacity to defend itself militarily, if it comes to this, on other countries willing to provide them with this. Just like Ukraine. The only difference is that Europe has money, and there was a question also about other ways to do. Well, when crisis comes, coronavirus, war, or something else, they find out money. It's not so difficult, they just can borrow money, they can find other ways, but the problem is that money has to be spent. And what you need money for is infrastructure, or skills, or even weapons. It's not something that can appear out of nowhere. All of this takes time, all of this takes efforts to produce and to master. So you can't reduce everything to money. You can, all Russian assets, they are already immobilized in Europe. They're in Belgium, even though Europe failed to actually use them for Ukraine, they had to issue a joint loan against the European Union budget. Still, the money are immobilized, and Russia is capable of continuing war. And part of it is Russia is more self-sufficient, but partially because Russia is not even getting these things from Europe. They have support by China. They were getting war materials accumulated over years from Iran, from North Korea. From North Korea, they were even getting soldiers when they were short on them. So you cannot reduce it to money. And the problem is the link, of course, we talk to the link, and there are different discussions inside the party. And the most recent example of how it harms, that there was a visit of MEPs and MPs, including from the link to Ukraine, to Lviv quite recently, when the country was hit, and this region was hit by one of the largest bombardments. And all those members of parliament, they had to spend night in a bomb shelter. As they were leaving the city, they could see many areas that were hit hard. And all this is because Ukraine has not enough capacity to close the sky over itself. Because Russian missiles, Russian drones, they strike Ukraine, they strike energy infrastructure, they strike people's houses. And it's not limited only to just military facilities. Quite recently, there was a total blackout in 2 regions of Ukraine. Almost 1 million people had nothing, no power at all. And it was minus 18 degrees outside. A little bit later, Kyiv was hit. And also there were 500,000 people left without any power. Now it is a little bit reinstalled, but still they have electricity just a couple of hours a day. And it is all because Ukraine cannot close the skies. So military support is important. And when this Die Linke, there was discussion within the Die Linke, after their experience, as soon as they closed the border, the German journalist calls and asks, what was the experience, how it was in Ukraine, she describes this heavy bombardment. And the journalist asks, so do you think that it maybe makes sense to vote for a coalition of armed people? She says, no, we still don't believe this is the solution. And it is immediately picked up by all the media, including in Ukraine, and people can read it perfectly, and they cannot comprehend how it could be. And it led to also discussions in Die Linke, because another MP said, like, she does not understand the logic of the other one. How you can experience this and say just, what do you do? I mean, you as MP, you visited, you spent one night and you left. What about the rest of the people? How can they survive without any means to protect themselves? So this is the main issue. Not the only one, of course, but it is quite critical. And talking about class perspective, I think the American comrade answered quite well. And I don't need to quote Hannah Arendt and rights to have rights. We all want a world without nations, without states, without classes. But right now, all our rights that we might have, social rights, political rights, economic rights, they're connected to us being citizens of a state. And for us, unfortunately, we are in this situation as we are. Even I can talk to you right now, but the only passport I have is Ukrainian. As soon as my visa expires, I can always end up in Ukraine. I have no other country to go to. And looking from working class perspective, but that's the perspective of Ukrainian workers as well. They do not wish to be conquered. They do not wish to be occupied. If it happens, it will be a loss for working class in Ukraine. It will be a loss for working class in Russia, whose government will become even more powerful.
I will add a little bit on some of the speech. I want to recall that we as leftists should stay on a materialistical base. And now it happens that Russia became really powerful, even more powerful than before before the Ukrainian invasion. Yeah, and on the other side, we have reached and not really defend Europe. And it's absolutely not clear what could stop Putin to continue his love to European culture, all of it. afraid that there's no alternative to militarization of Europe. But it not means that it should be only militarization. It also makes sense economic cooperation. It also makes sense not forget about international law. It also will help to stop Russia. But we can close our eyes and hope that somehow it will disappear or Putin will die. Of course, we hope like Ukrainians feel that. I think we should wait a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to go back to this gentleman's point because, yeah, I don't think that we should support either imperialist side in an inter-imperialist conflict. And I agree that we want to live in a world which is free from war, but unfortunately war is a reality. And for Syrians like Ukrainians, it's an existential struggle for survival. So in the early years of the revolution, when the Free Syrian Army represented the revolution's aspirations for democracy and freedom, I 100% supported calls to arm the Free Syrian Army, for the simple reason that people were left with three options. They either were left to be slaughtered. That position for me is both politically and morally indefensible, or they have arms to defend themselves, or they have the right to call for a foreign state to defend them. I don't see another option. So yes, in such a case, you listen to the voices on the ground, and if the people on the ground are saying they need arms to defend their communities from attack, to protect themselves from slaughter, to protect themselves from genocide, then we have to support those calls.
Wir würden jetzt erstmal Pause machen, eine halbe Stunde bis um 16 Uhr. Die Leute, die sich eben noch gemeldet hatten, können danach gerne noch ihre Frage stellen. Ich würde sie gerne noch aufnehmen. Ist das okay für alle? Gut. Okay, dann treffen wir uns um 16 Uhr wieder hier.
you